Ukraine just broke Russia's most prized possession. Ukraine carried out a calculated campaign to dismantle the most valuable asset Putin built over the Black Sea, and it could reshape the entire war. For years, Putin operated on one core belief. Crimea, seized in just 4 weeks back in 2014, was his forever. He was convinced Ukraine would never grow strong enough to take it back. He called the peninsula an unsinkable aircraft carrier, confident Russia would hold it for generations. That confidence turned Crimea into a tool for two major goals. First, dominance over the Black Sea. Whoever controls Crimea controls access to the Mediterranean and the energy resources surrounding it. Second, a staging ground against southern Ukraine. Putin stationed troops, weapons, and equipment there, using the peninsula to launch attacks on Ukraine's southern territory. Crimea served as both a forward base and a supply artery, anchored by the Kerch Bridge. Putin's logic was simple. As long as Ukraine stayed weak, Crimea would stay Russian forever. Ukraine shattered that logic, but not in a single move, through a years-long methodical strategy. Starting in 2022, Ukraine sank warships docked at Sevastopol, knocked out air defense systems, and struck the Kerch Bridge 3 separate times. In 2023, the crab trap operation hit the Black Sea Fleet's headquarters directly, killing over 30 officers. Partisan networks fed intelligence from inside occupied territory, piling on pressure until Russia had no choice but to relocate most of its fleet from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk, effectively retreating from the very peninsula it claimed it would never lose. By April and May 2026, this campaign entered its decisive stage. Ukraine hit the Tuapse refinery 4 times in just 16 days, severing Crimea's fuel lifeline. It destroyed the final operational railway ferry. It took out 2 landing ships. It leveled ammunition depots along the supply corridor. And it disabled tankers from Russia's shadow fleet. Every strike targeted the very lifelines Putin once swore were permanently secured. 60,000 Russian troops are now stranded without fuel. And what retired U.S. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges has warned for years may finally be unfolding. Crimea is the decisive battlefield of this war. The full liberation of the peninsula may already be underway. To understand the centerpiece of this strategy, we have to look at Tuapse. This Rosneft-owned refinery processed roughly 12 million tons of crude annually, producing naphtha, diesel, fuel oil, and Euro 5 grade fuel, all shipped out by tanker across the Black Sea. It was the shortest, fastest route for fuel reaching both Crimea and the Black Sea Fleet, the backbone of Putin's promise to keep the peninsula supplied. On April 16th, 20th, 28th, and finally May 1st, Ukraine struck this single refinery 4 times with pinpoint accuracy. The third strike pushed Putin into a rare public statement, accusing Ukraine of targeting civilian infrastructure. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Russia had spent the entire war bombing Ukraine's power grids, heating plants, and civilian buildings. The distinction was clear. Ukraine wasn't hitting civilian targets. It was hitting the oil revenue funding Russia's war machine, and Tuapse sat right at the center of that financial engine. In the final strike, a previously damaged pump station burned completely, crippling internal fuel transfer at the site. Satellite images confirmed all 4 main storage tanks were destroyed. Putin tried to spin the narrative, with the Kremlin claiming the strikes were worsening a global oil shortage. But Kyiv wasn't trying to spike global markets. Its goal was narrower and sharper: choke off Russia's export revenue and dry up the fuel feeding its military. The Kremlin itself confirmed the outcome, admitting Tuapse was now completely offline, production at 0. The most stunning part? Nearly every one of these strikes got through with almost no interception. Russia's S-400 batteries, Panzer S-1 systems, and layered coastal air defenses couldn't stop the drones. Tuapse fell. Air defense failed. And this wasn't an isolated incident, because once Tuapse went dark, Crimea was pulled straight into a fuel emergency. Losing Tuapse wasn't just losing a refinery. It was severing Crimea's lifeline. The peninsula has no refining capacity of its own. More than 90% of fuel for its 2.5 million residents came from mainland Russia via the Kerch Strait, processed mainly at Tuapse and Novorossiysk, then shipped to Kerch, Feodosia, and Sevastopol. Tuapse mattered most because it was the closest and fastest route, covering a major share of the Black Sea Fleet's fuel needs. That link is now gone. Fuel shortages in Crimea aren't new, but this time the scale is far bigger. Even before Tuapse went down in late 2025 and March 2026, cities like Simferopol, Yalta, and Alushta were already running dry on AI-95 gasoline and diesel. Stations posted none signs. Black market gasoline sold out of truck beds at inflated prices, and that was while Tuapse was still running. Now it's offline. The Feodosia depot has been hit. Tankers are out of service. If shortages were already this bad with the main artery intact, the scale of crisis once it's cut entirely is easy to imagine. But the real disaster is on the military side, and it's massive. An estimated 60,000 plus Russian troops are stationed across Crimea, relying on a constant flow of diesel, jet fuel, and mazut from the mainland to run tanks, artillery, armored vehicles, and helicopters. Ukraine targeted exactly these supply lines. The Feodosia fuel depot strike hit especially hard. It was a primary pipeline feeding units on the southern front. The Kerch Bridge, already damaged from earlier attacks, can no longer handle heavy military transport. The last railway ferry is gone too. According to a late April statement from the Russian partisan resistance network ATESH, Russian forces in southern Ukraine are now facing a deepening fuel crisis. One soldier put it bluntly, "Equipment isn't moving. We're not going anywhere." Commanders have imposed strict rationing, telling troops fuel is coming, without saying when. Logistics analysts estimate vehicle fuel availability on the southern front could drop 20 to 30%, meaning shorter operational range for armor, reduced ability to reposition defensively, and slower evacuations. The Black Sea Fleet is feeling it too, with resupply infrastructure at both Sevastopol and Feodosia damaged. On May 3rd, President Zelenskyy pushed further, striking 2 tankers from Russia's Shadow Fleet with naval drones near the entrance to Novorossiysk port. In his words, Ukraine's long-range strike capability will keep expanding at sea, in the air, and on land. Tuapse, offline. Feodosia depot, struck. 2 Shadow Fleet tankers, disabled. Last Kerch ferry, neutralized. Even Novorossiysk isn't safe. In March 2026, Ukraine launched over 200 drones at the port and sank the minesweeper Valentin Pikul. One by one, every artery feeding Crimea is being severed. But cutting fuel is only half the story. Ukraine is simultaneously dismantling every military supply route into the peninsula. On the night of April 5th, Ukrainian military intelligence confirmed drones had disabled the Slavyanin, the last functioning railway ferry across the Kerch Strait, a vessel that had been hauling equipment and ammunition to Russian forces. Every such vessel is now destroyed or out of commission. On April 20th, Ukrainian forces struck 2 large landing ships docked in Sevastopol Bay. The Project 775 Yamal could carry up to 500 tons of vehicles and troops. The Nikolai Filchenkov, even bigger, had a 1,000-ton capacity. Over 1 week in April, Ukraine also destroyed 3 ammunition depots, 3 supply warehouses, and 2 logistics hubs along the critical land corridor linking Russia to Crimea, disabling the junction points coordinating the entire flow of materiel. Last railway ferry, gone. 2 landing ships, destroyed. Ammunition depots and warehouses, leveled. The land corridor, under relentless pressure. The Kerch Bridge, already weakened, remains unusable for heavy transport, and General Hodges has been direct about its fate. That big bridge will eventually be destroyed. Russian commanders may try rerouting supplies through Kherson or via Donbass, but those roads sit far closer to the front line, well within range of Ukraine's drones. Detecting and hitting any convoy heading to Crimea is now just a matter of time. Crimea is being cut off, by sea, by land, and by rail. And the fallout isn't only military. Tuapse used to be one of the jewels of the so-called Russian Riviera, drawing hundreds of thousands of vacationers every summer. Now its beaches are coated in oil. Environmental experts estimate 300 to 350 tons of petroleum products have leaked into the surrounding sea and soil. Satellite imagery shows an oil slick stretching 7 kilometers, drifting north, putting the resort towns of Agoy, Nebug, and Olginka directly in its path. Smoke has reached as far as Sochi and Anapa, with the edge of the spill now just 30 kilometers from Putin's own palace at Cape Idokopas. Vil Mirzayanov, the chemist who helped develop the Novichok nerve agent, warned that the fumes from these fires are far from harmless, carrying toxic polyaromatic compounds. Meanwhile, Krasnodar's regional governor downplayed the fires as minor and even invited tourists to keep visiting, minimizing the damage, denying the health risk, ignoring the ecological disaster. This is just another layer of Crimea's growing isolation, exposing Russia's inability to protect even its own coastline. And the fallout extends well beyond Crimea. It's hitting Russia's broader oil export machine. Refinery output nationwide has fallen to 4.7 million barrels per day, the lowest figure in 17 years. Exports of refined diesel and fuel oil have dropped sharply. As the Wall Street Journal put it, Ukraine's strikes are effectively eating away the profits Russia is earning from high oil prices, like winning the lottery while someone systematically wrecks your car on the drive home. And the alternatives are running thin. Tuapse, Primorsk, Ust-Luga, Novorossiysk, every major port now sits within Ukraine's strike range. In 2022, Ukrainian long-range weapons could hit targets up to 650 kilometers away. By 2026, that range has nearly tripled to 1,750 kilometers. Defend one port, and Ukraine simply strikes another, a relentless cycle that's steadily draining Russia's air defense stockpiles. Russia is losing 40 to 50 critical air defense systems every month. On the battlefield, Russian advances have slowed to their weakest pace in years, frozen entirely in some sectors, reversing in others. Tens of thousands of soldiers are killed or wounded monthly. Recruitment numbers are sinking while desertions climb. February 2026 marked a real turning point. For the first time since 2023, Ukraine gained more ground than it lost. Adding to Putin's troubles, Hungary's Orban lost his election on April 12th, stripping Putin of one of his last remaining allies inside NATO and the EU, and clearing the final roadblock for Ukraine to receive a $90 billion credit line from the EU. One detail makes the severity unmistakable. No tanks at this year's May 9th Victory Day parade. Normally, Red Square showcases armored convoys and nuclear weapons as a display of Russian military might. This year, the Kremlin scrapped the armored procession entirely, turning what was meant to be a show of strength into perhaps the clearest public admission of weakness yet. China, Iran, and North Korea are watching this fragility unfold in the Black Sea, and it may be making them rethink the value of their support for Moscow. China continues buying Russian energy, giving Putin breathing room, but Beijing is recalculating the risk of backing an increasingly unstable partner. And that shift is quietly making China the dominant force in the alliance, whether Moscow likes it or not. Put it all together, Tuapse's collapse, Crimea's fuel crisis, the systematic destruction of supply lines, depleted air defenses, a stalled front, and a Victory Day parade with no tanks to show. And it points to one conclusion. In 2014, Putin called Crimea an unsinkable aircraft carrier. That carrier's fuel lines are cut, its supply routes destroyed, its defenses collapsing, and its coastlines soaked in oil. As General Hodges put it, Crimea is the decisive terrain of this war. And on the Kerch Bridge, his words are just as blunt. That big bridge will eventually be destroyed. All the pieces seem to be falling into place. Ukraine is dismantling Crimea's isolation piece by piece, with surgical precision, and the full liberation of the peninsula may have already begun. 4 strikes in 16 days took down Tuapse. The Feodosia depot was struck. The last railway ferry was sunk. 2 landing ships were destroyed. Ammunition depots along the land corridor were demolished. Shadow Fleet tankers were disabled. 60,000 Russian troops are stranded without fuel. The Kerch Bridge is on borrowed time. Not even tanks could cross Red Square. And Zelenskyy's warning still echoes in the Kremlin. Ukraine's long-range capabilities will keep growing, at sea, in the air, and on land. In 2014, Putin believed he'd locked Crimea into Russia for good. Now he's discovering just how wrong that belief was. Crimea is slipping back.